So, hello everyone, this is Djuntas. Ever since I started the channel back in 2014, I have been exploring Diablo 2 builds. I have always liked doing builds in the game, and today I will attempt to fairly rank all of the builds that I've done on the channel over the years. So a lot of the builds are your more standard ones, but about 1/3 of the builds belong in the more exotic category for sure. If you find I missed a build you like, do let me know about it in the comments below. Anywho, I always wanted to do one of these because I find them quite fun when other YouTubers also do them. But do remember, this is not a guide video. If you want to see in-depth individual leaders for the builds I talk about in this video, you can find them with my playlist in the description below. Hell, you can even download and try manning the builds of yourself. All of the info for that in the description. But with this little intro, let's start the tier ranking. So while I'm yapping away, I will show some gameplay for each of the builds. And for my criteria how I will rank them, it would be looking at fun, meta and reliability, and I'm just gonna quickly kind of explain that. So fun is kind of how the builds are played, such if they have a clunky rotation or require little focus to play. That could be something like Phoenix Strike Assassin has a clunky rotation and requires quite a bit of focus to play, but maybe something like a Javazon is more easy to play. And meta is how strong they are at endgame and even early on. So a lot of builds can be really good at both leveling, but they can also be very strong at endgame, and that is sort of how the meta is scored. And then finally also reliability, and that will refer to how easy the builds are to kind of make or do, because some of the Diablo 2 builds are quite hard to gear for, while maybe not offering much in return. And that could be some of the more exotic builds. They can be very expensive to gear for, while maybe not being that strong. So like the return in wealth, the time spent and everything can maybe not be that high on some builds. But yeah, these are the three criteria I also kind of have in my head while I kind of score each of the builds. So Frozen Orb and Lightning Sorceress, it's an A tier for me. This is probably one of the best sort of sorceress builds that you can do on a budget, while not going the more traditional way of maybe lightning. Full lightning, 117% faster cast rate lightning sorceress. This is more well-rounded for doing pretty much every content in the game while having the amazing amount of damage that Frozen Orb does. It's also really great leveling build. Highly recommend this if you're like on a budget and you don't want to do like fire, cold or something like that. It's also a very fun build, and I would say it's also one of the strongest one you can do. But it's not quite S tier. And so next up is the Trap Assassin. This is the full lightning one, and it's definitely going into the S tier. This is one of the more like good leveling builds, but also really strong in endgame builds that you can do. Death Sentry is just so strong, while it also has a reliable damage from the lightning sentries themselves. This build can also be made pretty cheaply, but I will say that if you go for exotic claws and everything, it's very costly. But yeah, you can make it work with like a Viper Magic, Shaco, shop some +3 to trap claws from the Act 5 health vendors and so on. But yeah, this is an extremely high pace build if you get the gear, but it's not easy to get it because it really can be expensive if you go for exotic claws. And so next up is our first melee build, the Whirlwind Barb. It's gonna go in the A tier. It's not better than Frenzy, I would say, so for now it's gonna stay in the A tier. But this is one of the better like PvP builds that you can also do, and PvM builds for melees. The cool thing also with the Whirlwind Barb is at least on players 1, maybe up to players like 4 or so, it has pretty good AoE. Whirlwind is of course not as much AoE as most caster builds, but it does have a way to kind of give melee builds a way to do area damage, so it's pretty sweet to just see. But it lacks damage, and it's quite expensive to build as well, and it's not a good level of the Barb. So yeah, it does lack some things to get into the S tier. And so next up is the Wind Druid or Elemental Druid. This is not an S tier build simply just because it's outclassed by many other caster builds such as the Hammer Paladin. However, it belongs in the A tier solidly, maybe one of the strongest A tier builds as well. The only issue this build kinda has that it does require some pretty specific gear, and it really does need Enigma as well to kind of be more fun to play with the whole tail stomp mechanic and so on, such as also the Hammer Paladin. But yeah, very strong build. quite fun to play actually, and it's very visually pleasing, just like having the crowd control going on and freezing and everything. And yeah, it has so much like survival. It's just kind of a meaty, tanky build, such as the Hammer Paladin. And so let's take a look at the summon Necromancer. So I'm a bit torn between A and S tier. I would say it's an S tier just because it has such a reliable way to level, and you don't really have to have any gear to play it. So I think it belongs in the S tier simply just because of its very strong early on performance, while it does lag a little bit at end game, just because sort of like it lacks that punch damage, and it has to rely on the armor, which can be a bit annoying to keep up and everything. Like a lot of people enjoy kind of just, yeah, min-maxing that army, you know, maybe even buffing with the skeleton mages and everything, but it can be a bit of a chore for some people. Still, just because of its very strong early on performance, I think it belongs in the S tier. Oh, and it's also one of the few builds or caster builds that sort of can reliably do Uber Tristram. While it does need some specific summons to do that, it's still one of the few caster builds that can do Uber summons or Uber Tristram. And now time for another sorceress build, which I think belongs in the S tier, mainly because it's very strong at endgame. While the Frozen Orb and Lightning Sorceress is very similar to it, you're literally just switching out one spell for another. This has something that no other sorceress build really does. Extremely high single target damage. If you play this correctly, lining up the Frozen Orb to explode inside of the target's corpse or whatever, the body, and then place those fireballs in between, it's probably one of the highest single target builds in Diablo 2. Maybe only beaten by like the Charge Strike Javazon that is really kitted out with some very high end gear. This build is not very safe, and it's a bit hectic to play, and it's like, yeah, there are some minuses as well. I wouldn't maybe level with this build as well, but damn, once you get the gear, you can really just see that this does some crazy amount of damage if you play it right. It does need a little bit of focus to get those Frozen Orb and Fireball going correctly. And so time for the first Amazon build, the standard sort of meta bow Amazon. I wish I would put this in the A tier, but for some people who have followed my channel all the years, they know I have a very hard time with the bow Amazon. It requires some of the most costly gear to kind of perform at endgame. It's not a very strong leveling build, and it's also kind of just weak even once you have all the gear. Like, you need some items that are, let's just say, out of reach for most people to ever afford, even if they were going to be trading. Like if you were even, you know, playing online, doing JSP trading, everything, it would still be a little bit hard to get these sort of items that are true best in slot, wine furry, Hydra bow, whatever sort of bow Amazon that you would kind of see at endgame. I really wish that the bow Amazon was stronger, but it just isn't. It was stronger before Blizzard perhaps nerfed guided shot and whatnot in the early days of Diablo 2. But yeah, it's never gonna compete with other builds in the A tier, and definitely not the S tier. So I think the bow Amazon, while maybe a bit controversial at the start here, but it belongs in the B tier. And so time for another sorceress build. This one I would say belongs in the A tier, but because of how hard it is to gear for, I think I will put it in the B tier. The Zeal sorceress. This is one of the most unique sorceress builds that you can probably do. However, doing the way that I did with Dual Dream and other sort of exotic items made it prohibitively expensive to build. It's probably also one of the hardest builds that you can do in Diablo 2. Well, I think it's actually the hardest builds that I ever done on the channel, just because there's so many ways to gear the Zeal sorceress. If you want to tinker with builds and you want to kind of explore different ways to play, the Zeal sorceress gets my highest recommendation of all the builds that I'm gonna talk about in the video here, just because you can literally, as I also showed in my video, build it maybe like 5 different ways. There's no real like right way to play it. The base items is mostly just getting the Passion rune word, which is also a bit hard to get. So yeah, the Zeal sorceress, not quite A tier, just because of how hard it is to gear for. And now we come for one of my favorite builds, the 200% faster cast rate Nova sorceress. So I'm torn about either S tier or A tier. The only reason why I would not put it in the S tier is because it's pretty expensive to build. Like, you need some pretty exotic items if you're gonna go for 200% the fast cast rate. You can also just aim for 105 and the build still works okay and be much cheaper. But if you're gonna aim for 200%, it's pretty expensive to build. And also, Nova doesn't really have the staying power above like players 5. Once you get to like players 4 or 5, the build just kind of starts to lack damage. But it is the fastest, and I do mean it is the fastest of all builds that you can do on players 1. So if you were only gonna have fun, mess around on players 1, this is the fastest build in the game by far. You have the crazy amount of teleport speed, obviously from 200%. And then also Nova doing like one-shotting most mobs, just boom, 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 boom. And then you also have fun mechanics like energy shield and other sort of variations on how you can build it. But I think I also have to really realize that a lot of people are also going to play co-op, so it doesn't really belong in S tier just because it does lack some power on players 8, for instance. So next up is another druid build, the fire elemental one. So I'm a bit stuck between B or C tier, but I think I'm gonna put it in the C tier. And it's mainly just because of the clunky rotation, the low damage to non-fire immunes, and overall it's just not really that fun to play. It's also not the strongest leveler build. It is okay for leveling, but yeah. It also kind of requires a lot of gear to kind of be okay. Yeah, I don't really like this build, and it's mainly just because it only does one really decent like elemental, fire elemental only. So if you go into like chaos run, it's just gonna be a bad experience because you're gonna have to rely on your the bear summon or the merc to kind of kill a lot of things for you. So yeah, it's not very good. I just don't enjoy the fire druid. So in the C tier it goes. So now we come to one of the more exotic builds, the Rift Assassin. So this is the first sort of, what can you say, a bit more unique build that not a lot of people have done before. The Rift Assassin is just, chef's kiss. Like this build, if you want to have fun and you want to do something different, the Rift Assassin is just the way to go. Really good AoE because of the frozen orbs. It has a lot of fun mechanics. There are many ways to gear it. It's overall actually very strong. Especially for melee build, it's actually quite good. However, I don't think it quite belongs in the S tier just because it might be a little bit kind of hard to gear for. And the performance is, well, it's a melee build, so it's maybe never gonna be as strong as most caster builds. However, if you want to have fun and explore actually very good strong build, but while also being, you know, cool, like if you're gonna play a Rift Assassin, you're never gonna see somebody else play that build. That's how rare it is. At least I have never seen somebody play it online when I was in, you know, public games and so on. And so next up, another druid build, the Furry Druid. So it doesn't really scale that good at leveling. Like, it's pretty bad leveling build. I would say it's pretty hard to actually level with this. At least until you get maybe, I don't know, like level 40 or so, when you can kind of start leeching a little bit better and so on. But for end game, it's actually quite strong for a melee build. It has Fury, which is a pretty good AoE, and it also has like really great survival. But it lacks damage. It's never really gonna scale that good, and again, the AoE is not that great. So I don't think it, like, this is one of the weakest A tier builds for sure, but it's not B tier, I would say. The Furry Druid also needs a lot of gear to perform really well. You can go with a Whip Cracker and be okay, but if you really want to reach the end game potential, you need an ethereal Tomb Breather with 3 sockets, and that is a very costly weapon if you don't know. Like, that is a GG find if you ever find one yourself. Even if it rolls low stats, it's gonna be very valuable. And so time for another necromancer build, the Bone Necromancer. So I wasn't really sure if this would be an S tier or an A tier. So I think for now it's going to be A tier, just because I think it lacks just a little bit of that fun, that little bit of spark compared to the Poison Necromancer, Nova Necromancer, which I like personally more. But I can see this build also be S tier. The only real problem this build has, it lacks maybe just a little bit of survival and then single target damage. So the overall gear path is also quite a bit easier than the poison necromancer, I would say. You can kind of just roll with like dual spirit or get a Hotu and Shaco. Enigma, you don't really have to get that as well. It's pretty great, but I wouldn't say it's S tier. And so let's take a look at another paladin build. This time it's the Vengeance Paladin, and it's going squarely in the C tier. The only reason why you should make a Vengeance Paladin would be to experiment maybe with an odd Griswold set, just trying something different. It has like that One Punch Man feel. It's very punchy. Once you get to hell, even with low gear, you can pretty much one-shot mobs. But it lacks AoE, and it doesn't really leech that well, also due to the elemental damage part of Vengeance skill. So yeah, you're just gonna be better off making like a standard Zeal Paladin. Vengeance doesn't really belong anywhere. I can't, with goodwill, put this in the B tier. So Vengeance Paladin is gonna belong to the C tier. And so let's take a look at another Amazon build. This time it's the Frostbow Amazon, or Frost Maiden as I like to call it. It's squarely in the B tier. If I had to say, like, if you were gonna compare it to the standard bow Amazon, I would say the standard bow Amazon, if you have, you know, access to all the endgame items such as a faith that is, you know, perfectly rolled with 15 aura, 2 skills or whatever, like, if you have the wealth, the standard bow Amazon is better than the frostbow Amazon, but they're pretty comparable. However, the fun thing with the frostbow Amazon is the crowd control and sort of the visual pleasing gameplay. It's not as good as the standard bow Amazon, but I would still say it's a worthwhile build to do. However, it's also again another build that needs some specific gear to kind of perform well, such as the Ice Rune Word. And so time for another Barb build, and I think this one is going to be the first D tier build, the Throw Barb. I really tried to min-max this one in the guide that I did. I tried to really make it work. Like, there are maybe some improvements to that guide that I could have done, but there are so many things that are obviously wrong with this build. It's one of the worst leveling builds. It has the issue with quantities running out mid-combat, and those quantities just runs out so fast. It's like, it feels like it's as fast as, or double as fast as bow Amazon runs out of arrows and so on. And the damage, man. you can't get good damage for the Throw Barb. No way that you can make this really work on players like 5 to 8 or so on. Like, it kills okay, and it does look very fun. And if you want to kind of just have something different, be a little quirky, the Throw Barb is definitely there for you. There's also some, like, there's a few ways to kind of gear it, you can experiment and so on, have a little bit of fun with that, tinker around. But yeah, for now, this is going to be the first D tier builds, and I hope there's not going to be too many of them. And so let's take a look at a build much like the Rift Assassin. This is just using fire traps and dragon talent, much like the other one. So this is actually a very strong build. The performance surprised me. Sure, it's never gonna be one of the strongest melee builds, but considering that you use fire traps, which are usually only used while leveling, if you're gonna speedrun a leveling assassin or whatever, fire traps are very strong early on, until at least you can get maybe Death Sentry and go lightning or something like that. So yeah, it does perform pretty okay for leveling, and it's actually very fun to play. I enjoyed this build, but it's not gonna be an A tier. However, it's one of the strongest B tier builds here for sure. And so let's take a look at the Jab Amazon. So this is a build that is not very used a lot, but just because it's kind of overshadowed by the standard Charge Strike or Lightning Fury Javazon, but it still has some fun to it. I like it, the build. It wasn't one of the worst builds I ever done. However, I can't put it among B tier builds. So this unique, quirky little build that also relies a lot on kind of costly items, it's not very easy to gear for. It had some issues. Even once I had the best in slot gear, there were still kind of issues with it in terms of capping resistance, attack rating and so on. Like, yeah, it's not the best build, but it doesn't really belong in the D tier either, so it's going squarely in the C tier. And now time for another unique exotic sorceress build. There are quite a few on the list here, I would say. But yeah, this is the Bear Sorceress. So this is like going into Werebear with the Beast Wound Word and kind of just having that high enchant damage, doing damage with the Holy Shock Aura and all that sort of stuff. It's not an A tier build, and it is kind of a little bit hard to gear for and so on. Like, it's definitely costly, especially also if you get a very crazy inventory. Then it really does go through the roof in terms of cost. But I don't think it should belong in the C tier, but it's also not quite A tier, just because of the prohibitively high cost and sort of the, not really the greatest returns in wealth that you get out of building it. But B tier for now. And so let's take a look at the Phoenix Strike Assassin. This is one of the weakest melee builds in the game, and also one of the rarest, I would say. Well, you wouldn't really want to level with this build, because Dragon Talon sort of variation is always going to be better. However, it is pretty fun if you like the sort of clunky rotation with the charges. I think the first charge was lightning, the second charge was frozen up, and the third was meteor or something like that. So constantly in your head you're rearing these charges, like, okay, so first you want to build up one charge, then you fire off that spell. It's 2 charges and 3 charges. And yeah, the rotation is more involved. Some people would enjoy the challenge of playing such a build. However, I found the rotation to be pretty clunky and annoying, and the power wasn't really quite there. It also kind of could end up relying on traps and so on to kind of make it perform well. But it's not a D tier build either, because it's not that expensive to gear for, and it is pretty fun to play. And it's also very unique. You're never gonna see anyone really play a Phoenix Strike Assassin. But yeah, I think it's gonna belong in the C tier. Yeah, definitely the C tier. Right after this exotic assassin build, let's take another one. The Whirlwind Assassin. So it's quite expensive to make. You need the Chaos Rune Word. Like, there are some cost factors you have to kind of think about, but it is quite fun. You're also gonna have one of the best PvP assassin builds. I think it's very meta in that regard, at least. But yeah, would I put it in the B tier? Yeah, I think I would put it in the B tier. However, I do want to note that if you don't use Death Sentry with this build, it is pretty lacking in damage. It's just not that strong, and also poison damage and all those sort of mechanics are very weak in hell, just because of mobs resistance and everything. But yeah, if you rear in Death Sentries and play it well enough, it is actually pretty good damage. So I think it belongs in the B tier. And so next up, another sorceress build. I'm a little torn on even including this one, because it's not made often a lot. So this would be a fire and lightning sorceress, a build that is not done a lot. And it's probably for good reason, because it sort of lacks that control that Frozen Orb or Blizzard gives you, while also being pretty mana costly. It has some flashy gameplay, and it is quite fun, and you will probably be the only sorceress that sort of does lightning and fire. In my build, which I think I showed on the channel, I did like Fireball and Nova, which was pretty fun, just kind of being up close to mobs, being very aggressive in my playstyle and so on. But yeah, I don't think it should even be in the A tier. Yeah, I think I'm gonna put it in the B tier, just because it's also not really that used a lot, and I think it's for good reason why a lot of people might rather go Frozen Orb and Lightning, or even something like Full Frost. And so time for the Frenzy Barb. This is likely one of the strongest meta melee builds that you can do. The Frenzy Barb should probably always be the S tier build, just because it's probably the strongest melee build that you can do in Diablo 2, besides a Zeal or paladin. The Frenzy Barb, compared to the Whirlwind Barb, has better single target and can easily outperform most builds on single target damage as well. And it's also quite fun. I enjoy the run speed. I also enjoy the leech mechanic and how it's sort of played. You get used to the playstyle pretty fast. Like, it seems a little overwhelming at the start with the run speed and so on, but it's quite fun once you get the playstyle down. But yeah, I'm a little bit torn on putting a melee build in the S tier, but I think the Frenzy Barb deserves it, just to kind of represent what sort of the best melee builds can do in Diablo 2. Because for sure the Whirlwind Barb lacks damage on players 8, it just doesn't really compare if you ask me. But this is maybe a bit of a controversial topic as well. Whirlwind Barb versus Frenzy Barb, some people are maybe gonna think the Whirlwind Barb is better for every type of gameplay. But for now, I think it's going to be S tier for Frenzy Barb. So I'm starting to like icons now. It's a bit hard to kind of get a good overview. The tier list here was missing a few icons. But we will just kind of try to, get through it. And so time for another exotic build. A build that you're never gonna see anyone play but yourself if you wanted to pick it up. Melee necromancer builds. I've done 2 of them. And the second one was the best one, using bone armor and a Breath of the Dying axe. It was actually pretty fun and it worked very well. The survival was also kind of amazing for this sort of exotic build, because the bone rune word, how it was called, really surprised me. It worked very well, and it wasn't as complicated to build as something like a Zeal sorceress or anything like that. It was quite straightforward and it just sort of worked okay. But the damage and the reliability on having to use corpse explosion to make it work makes it a bit of a boring build overall. Again, I wanted to make the physical melee part of the build work, but that never really turned out to be that good. So I don't think it belongs in the B tier. It, however, should also not be a D tier build. But yeah, if you make it, you're gonna end up spamming corpse explosion to kind of make it performing okay. So that is why I think it belongs in the C tier. And so next up is the Blizzard Sorceress. This is maybe the most meta build in Diablo 2, just because every sorceress that has probably lived had to have started out with the Blizzard. Once you get to like level 24 and you put down your first Blizzard, you quickly realize just how strong casters are in Diablo 2. Like, it's not very fair. You get teleport and then right after you have Blizzard. Blizzard is just a lot of damage. It's not very fun to play. It's also one elemental, so you're gonna be farming specific areas that sort of has no cold immunes and whatnot, like ancient tunnels in Act 2 or however it was called. But if it belongs in the A tier, I think it does, just because it can also quickly become another build if you just respec it, because the gear is very easy to reuse if you were gonna respec it to maybe Frozen Orb, Lightning or something like that. But yeah, very strong early on. Lacks a bit of power once you get to endgame, but it's still very reliable and it really requires no gear at all to make this build work at hell difficulty. And then next up is the Singer Barb. So a lot of people have probably never made a Singer Barb before, and it's for good reason. The only thing it kind of does well is supporting other players. So if you were gonna go for like a speed run, 10 hours ladder reset to get to Uber Tristram, Warcry or Singer Barb would probably be a good choice for that 8-man party or however many people you play with. The damage is very lacking, even on players 1, but the crowd control is amazing. Like, it does more crowd control than even the Frost Bow Amazon build. I don't think it belongs anywhere but the C tier, just because it's a niche build that only maybe speedrunners or serious people would put in a meta scenario where they would, however, to get a lot of benefit from it. Like, if you are serious about speedrunning in a co-op party or something, having that single Warcry Barbarians just lock everything down on map, and I do mean lock everything down on map, it is a pretty amazing support, and it is quite fun to play as well. Like, it's not boring to play, so that aspect also has to be said. But yeah, I think it belongs in the C tier, just because it's more of a co-op build than something that you would play solo. And now time for something I think most people will agree is an S tier build. So I'm actually lagging the icon for it. This tier list was a bit lagging again, as I mentioned, but we will take the Nova Sorceress icon and put it up in the S tier. And what build am I talking about? Of course, it's the standard Lightning Sorceress, 117% faster cast rate infinity. This build is just so strong. It doesn't even require like that much gear to get going. and once you have the gear, I mean, you're doing, I think the best you can do, which is also showed in my guide back then, was 51k lightning damage. Maybe you can get it higher, maybe like 55k with very exotic, weird gear. But yeah, man, this build, it has so much damage. It is fun to play, it's active to play, it literally does everything. Yeah, you're gonna rely on Infinity, and you kind of have some mana issues and survival issues. You're a little bit stressed. I will say it's not like a easy build that just stands in the background throwing frozen orbs or blizzards or whatever. Like, it is a bit more active play build, because you also kind of like have to aim the lightning. So yeah, you have to be a little more active playing it. But besides relying on Infinity, maybe some costly gear and a little more stressful gameplay, it is definitely one of the strongest caster builds, if not the strongest caster build in Diablo 2. And it's also kind of the build that every sorceress starting out maybe farming with Blizzard ends up like aspiring to, just because everyone knows that 117% the fast cast rate lightning sorceress is just that good. So everyone wants to get to that build eventually. And right after the last S tier build, let's do another one. Why not? The Lightning Javazon. This has the highest single target damage of any builds, maybe besides the Frozen Orb and Fireball Wizard that I just talked about. This build is easy to gear for, it's very strong leveler. It doesn't really require that much gear besides an Infinity. So if you can get the Infinity Rune Word, it's pretty much just go time. It's like it's just amazing to play. And once you get the end game gear, in my case that is a Phoenix shield, the Rune Word Phoenix, because it has the redemption aura. You don't even have to worry about mana problems. So a little just killing things, and you're getting your mana back with redemption. And the AoE, man, the AoE, it's easy to play. You have no real survival problems. Like, you don't really leech well because of all the damage that you do is mostly just lightning based. But it's not a problem, because you're just gonna stand in the back, and then occasionally going in with charge strike. And also, it's a pretty strong PvP build. It's fun. Yeah, there's a reason why so many Lightning Javazons are being made. It's maybe not the first build that some people would do on a ladder reset or whatever. Still, it deserves to be in the S tier for all the reasons that I just mentioned. And since we're on a roll, let's do another S tier build. Why not? The Hammer Paladin. So the Hammer Paladin is, of course, in everyone's eyes, like the ultimate build in Diablo 2. And I'm gonna highlight my reason also because I recently discovered this in some budget videos that I did. I took a look at like the worst budget geared builds that you can kind of do, like no gear at all, literally buying items at the armor vendor in Act 5 or whatever. I found the Hammer Paladin also to be the strongest budget build with no gear. This build is just stupid. It has no immunities. Once you get an Insight Merc, you also don't really have mana problems. That's another thing also. This is the only build of all the builds that I talk about in this entire video that I will use Insight Rune Mode on at the end game. Because the only real problem the Hammer Paladin has is that one, it kinda needs Enigma to be fun. You can play without Tailor Stomp and be okay, but it does need Enigma. So early on, a lot of people playing Hammer Paladins are really gonna want that J rune to make an Enigma. And then two, the mana issues. So this build combined with teleporting with Enigma and so on uses a lot of mana. So you're gonna have to use an Insight Mercenary, which in my eyes is a pretty big issue, just because it's not a very good damage the Merc does with Insight Rune Word. In fact, even a very crazy GG Insight whatever, it's not really a lot of damage compared to a decent Cryptic Axe, Infinity or Reaper's Toll. But that is the only two major things that I can say negatively about this build. Everything has already been said about this build. No immunities, insane survival, crazy good leveling build. Did I mention that it literally feels like you're playing a tank doing this build? Like you can just stand in everything and not die. Max block, 10-20k armor, easy to cap resistance. Like you just need like a Morris amulet or something like that, and suddenly you're fully capped on resistance. You can also gear different, like you can go for 125% faster cast rate or down to 75% for even more survival stats, which is also a bit cheaper to build. So there's so many pluses. You can build it cheaply or you can build it a little more expensive. The Hammer Paladin is by far the best build in Diablo 2, most likely. I also just want to mention here quickly at the end, I actually don't like playing the Hammer Paladin just because I find the telestomp and positioning a bit annoying and clunky. So I wouldn't necessarily enjoy the Hammer Paladin as much as some of the other S tier builds here. But if you don't mind, you know, telestomp mechanic and positioning yourself with the hammers as they spin out, it's a crazy build. But yeah, I will leave it at that. But let's try to dial it down now, take it a little bit slower, starting here with the Fireclaw Druid. So I actually quite enjoyed this build. The problem is that it's sort of like a Vengeance Paladin. It doesn't really have a lot of AoE. Well, it has really nothing. But it does have good survival. It's fun. It's a unique build. Like if you're gonna play this, you're probably gonna be the only one in your public party or whatever. It's also a pretty good PvP build. Like there are some pretty good things about it, but I don't think it's... Yeah, will I put it in the B tier among some pretty strong builds? Yeah, I think I would say this is about as good as like a Bear Sorceress or something like that. It's definitely not one of the strongest B tier builds, but yeah, for now I think the Fireclaw Druid belongs in the B tier just because it is pretty unique and it is actually quite good. I quite enjoyed this build for what it is. And right after Fireclaw Druid, let's take another build that is also not very meta. The Fist of Heaven's Charger, Paladin, Smite, whatever you want to call it. It's a very, very good PvP build, but it's also very bad in PvM. And being that it's so bad in PvM, I don't think it belongs even in the B tier. It is kind of fun to just do that Fist of Heaven thing, maybe charge a little around, do some smite in PvM. You can also utilize this with Griswold set, getting some 5-eye lightning sockets in it and do a lot of damage with Fist of Heavens alone. Like it's not completely useless in PvM, but for the most part you're just kind of being stuck in the background, not doing a lot of damage while your party kind of wipes the mobs away with their AoE. So yeah, I think this is going to be in the C tier. But it is, however, probably one of the strongest A tier, S tier PvP builds in Diablo 2. So do keep that in mind. And so time for a bit of an exotic paladin build. The Holy Fire Runeword sort of fire paladin build, whatever you want to call it. This utilizes Dragon Runeword and sort of other exotic costly runewords that are not often made. And I think for that reason, this sort of quirky, exotic paladin build belongs in the C tier. The Holy Fire, no matter what you kind of do to it, it's not a lot of damage compared to Holy Shock. And the Zeal damage is also going to be a bit lagging if you use like Hand of Justice Runeword and so on. Like it's just not very strong, it's very costly, and it doesn't really make sense to build unless you just enjoy something quite unique. You know, nobody's really gonna make a Holy Fire Paladin completely decked out with all the rune words it needs to kind of be good at end game. But yeah, there's also another thing. Holy Fire is fire damage, and I think that there's too much like fire resistance mobs in general in the game. That is also another hindrance. But yeah, I think this belongs in the C tier. And then just another quirky, exotic sorceress build. I would probably think it should just be in the C or the D tier. Let's go for C tier. So this sorceress build relies on a rune word to proc Hydras while you're in bear form. it's actually quite fun. It's visually pleasing, it's somewhat strong, but I would still just rather make a standard lightning or holy shock lightning bear sorceress over this one. Still, if you want to be literally maybe the only one on a goddamn realm, or however rare it's going to be, playing this build, you can definitely be very unique. And yeah, I like the playstyle, and it does actually work with the Hydra spawning and everything, but it is more of a niche fun build, so in the C tier it goes. And now time for most likely my favorite build in Diablo 2. So it's a melee build, it's easy to play, it's very strong, it's visually pleasing, it's quite unique. You can even somewhat level with it and then just kinda maybe respec once you have the items, like it does literally everything. The only thing it does have as a big minus is it needs a lot of expensive items. It needs either a Reaper's Tall Merc or an Infinity Merc. It needs like Enigma, it needs Grief and Dual Dream. So I think a lot of people know what I'm talking about now. The Tesladin. So you can make this either without Dual Dream, which is going to be quite a bit less expensive, so that is a budget option. But I found the Dual Dream with 25% conviction ore to be the best. But if you don't have the budget for getting Dual Dreams, which also needs to be rolled with some pretty high faster hit recovery and whatnot, which again makes the build much more expensive, you can go with self-cast Holy Shock Tesladin. But the best one I found to be was just using Dual Dream with all the other standard items. This build really does belong in the S tier, which I think a lot of people will also agree if they try it out. And again, you can try out this build or any of the other builds that I have. You can just see the description below for info on that and how to download them and try them out. Because I really do think that a lot of people would enjoy doing the Tesladin themselves, just because it really does surprise me with the performance. Now, the only thing the Tesladin doesn't have is strong like players 5 to 8 performance. That is where I think something like the Frenzy Barb is going to be better, or the Javazon or similar builds like that. It does lack some damage once you get to that players 8 content, but damn, it's strong. And just for the fun of it, some time ago I made a fire necromancer, so this is using the full Trang'oul set. You should probably never make this. I think for a lot of people it would just be a fun little casual experiment to kind of make the full Trang'oul set work a little bit in a different way. C tier would probably be a bit of a stretch, because that build is going to compare to like the Hydra bear sorceresses I just mentioned. I think a fire necromancer is a very cool thing. Like, it's fun, it's not that expensive to make, and it's pretty easy to do as well, the build. Yeah, I actually think I would put it up in the C tier, even if that's a little bit controversial, because again, I really just don't like the throw barb. It's really just clunky and annoying to play. That's the main thing, where this is not that annoying to play, so I think it's going to be in the C tier. And so time for another exotic build. This one is the Tiger Strike Dragon Punch Assassin. So this is definitely a build that I've never seen anyone play online, but this performance actually surprised me. I'm a little torn between C tier or B tier. If I put it in the C tier, it would definitely be one of the strongest in this tier here. I think it's actually better than the Phoenix Strike Assassin. The single target was good, the rotation is pretty easy to play, and the AoE is also there. Yeah, I actually think I'm gonna put it in the B tier. Maybe a little bit controversial. Again, it's really kind of a niche build and does require some little bit of a harder items to get. Yeah, I think it actually does belong above the B tier, just because I liked it more than the Phoenix Strike Assassin. Mainly just because the rotation is a little bit easier and so on to play. And then the last exotic build just before the list ends. The self-cast Holy Shock Werebear Paladin. So this build was probably not as good as a bear sorceress. It actually survive pretty well, but in the end it does like physical damage to survive, leech. It lacked just kind of that staying power, which I think the bear sorceress has. So yeah, I'm a little torn that putting it in the C tier, I don't think it quite belongs there, just because it did have quite some performance. But it would be one of the weakest B tier builds for sure. Also just because I found that the Holy Shock damage was actually not very good. So the Holy Shock damage was probably one of the worst of like the 5 Holy Shock damage builds that I've done on the channel, which was a bit of a letdown. But overall, I think it could belong in the B tier. Also just because it's a paladin, like it has a lot of cool things that a paladin can obviously do, like more defense, some survival stats. You can also just quickly make it into a standard Zeal paladin, and so on. But yeah, fun build for definitely. You're not really gonna see anyone make a Werebear paladin. It's very rare at least. And then the very last build, the Poison Nova necromancer. So this build is actually very fun to play. It has very good like class mechanics, and it has a lot of ways you can gear it. So you can just kind of go budget with like spirit, dual spirit, maybe like peasant crown, Shaco, viper magic, you know, the basic cast items, and still be quite good. But once you get to the end game, that means like 3-part Trang'oul for the minus resist set bonus, Death's Web, 5/5 facets in the gear, Enigma, faster cast rate breakpoints, you know, that sort of end game costly gear, especially if you can get a very good Death's Web. The build just kind of takes off and becomes something that is fun. Just stacking minus lower resist, that is such a cool mechanic, and it works very well. On top of that, I would also say that it sort of is more fun to play than the Bone necromancer. I'm a little torn on putting it in the S tier, because I've tested this before. I know that the necromancer has very good clear speeds. Like even on players 8, it's just gonna clear maps excellently. Like it's one of the best clear builds for Chaos runs on players 8 and so on. But once you get to bosses, like unless you have a very good army up, which can be a bit hard to do when you're also spamming corpse explosion all the time, and kind of just more focusing on doing poison damage on your own than relying on summons. Yeah, once you get to the bosses that have more health, the damage just falls off, and it's one of the slowest boss killers in the game, just because it can't kill anything with poison Nova alone. At least it really is very slow, which also ruins the overall clear speed if you were gonna go for like really high, fast 8 clears solo. But yeah, this is a very fun build. A lower resist curse is also a very strong buff to the party if you are playing with casters and so on. So for that reason, I think it does belong in the S tier, above the Bone necromancer, I would say. That is the list of the 39 best builds that I've done over the years on the channel. Again, if I left any builds out you think should have been represented, I would love to know about it in the comments, and maybe we can consider making a new list in the future, who knows. But for now, these 39 builds are the best builds that you can probably make in Diablo 2. Because over the years I really have tried to kind of explore new video ideas, builds that I could do to entertain you people out there. And I think the 39 builds that I have managed to do so far on the channel are probably also the 39 like most decent builds. Because of course you can make like a bow paladin or something really weird like that, but they're never really gonna be like performing good. Like they're not really gonna be that fun to play in the long run. Which I think even something like the Throw Barb or Singer Bark, Vengeance Paladin, the Fire Druid, Jab, Amazon, like even those sort of builds that are not very good are at least gonna be okay to play, even if you know you're never really gonna be, among the A's and the S tiers of builds. But yeah, thank you so much for watching the video, everyone. I would love to know if you have any thoughts on the list overall, and please do like the video and share it if you want to. I tried to put in some effort now in this video here, and I hope that you actually found this useful, because I've always wanted to do a a fun little tier list on the channel, because I do enjoy this sort of content myself when I watch it from other YouTubers. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and have a good one.